You know, when your kids together, it's hard to think of us as being 70, right, Larry? Larry's life and my life date back to when we really truly were kids, because his family lived in Moses Lake at the same time I did, and his aunt and uncle and their children, Paul and Wanda Smith, and we were just all friends. And Larry, somehow we kind of got separated in the whole thing. And when he came as an associate pastor, I was at Loma Linda. And so it's really exciting to get to have you as Pastor Larry Evans, and you've got a title this long. You're a special assistant to the president, and you believe in special needs. And I'm just really excited that God has brought you here, Larry. Thank you so much.
Wow, what a privilege it is to be here. You probably don't understand just how hard it was to be here. God had to do some amazing things. Had to save my life, literally, from sickness and from plane crashes and from all sorts of things. So I stand here really in a humble thing. I had tears about 2 o'clock in the morning as I was thinking about this moment. I know many of you, and I probably know more of you if my memory were better, but that happens. I am thankful for this opportunity to come back to my conference. Pastor Weir, Pastor Labrador, thank you. I see colleagues here. If I start naming someone, I'll leave them off. There are some I can't leave off. Mel Johnson and Alma were the senior pastor when I was here. You don't know this, but I prayed that I would not come to Moses Lake as an intern. Lord, please, any place but Moses Lake. You see, I went to 1 year of church school here, and everything else was in public school, including Frontier Junior High. I would drive on our way to Frontier Junior High. Mom would drive us right past the old Adventist Church. And I would look at that church as I go by, and there was the pastor's office, and I said to myself, wouldn't it be nice if you could be a pastor and know that you were saved? That office later became mine. You hear that? God has a way of turning things around, but what you may not know is that my grandfather, who was blessed financially in many ways in South Dakota, who I heard somebody say that there's some Dakota linkage to here, because that's where we came from, kind of. We came from all over. But it was an amazing thing, because my grandfather made it possible for me to go to Spangle, Upper Columbia Academy. And I did really bad in Bible class. Wasn't much better in algebra, was I, Dan? And I did really bad. I didn't understand the difference. I learned later that they don't flunk you in Bible. They just give you a U, unsatisfactory. And so I blamed Bible on my struggle with algebra. And I remember standing out, I was on the yard crew or whatever, and I remember shaking my fist at God. And I said, the last thing I will ever be is a preacher or a teacher. I had no idea how prophetic those words would be, because they will be the last thing I do. And the route to get to this point is a miracle, So I take a little different look at the gospel and a bunch of things, and Dick, thank you, because without mercy, we would not be here. And my mother and a lady by the name of Rennie Fisher contrived together against my dad and worked it out so that I would room with a Christian influence of Dan Fisher. And Dan announced to me one day, knowing that I was doing poorly in Bible and in algebra, and I had really foul mouth. I'm sorry, but I had a very bad language problem. Picked up some of that from my dad, and then I went on from there. And Dan announced to me one day, he says, Merwin, the other roommate, and I have decided to make you our missionary project. If you want to know how bad you are, wait till somebody tells you they're a mission project. Now, this is not new to Dan, because I spoke at the alumni meeting at Upper Columbia Academy, and I had Dan's permission to tell that story. Dan went through his own journey, some of you may know. And I knew about that, and I said, Dan, could we do something? I said, let me tell this story. And let me tell your story a little bit. And then I'm going to say, would you like to meet that roommate who told me this? Come on up, Dan. And Dan did. And there we shared with that alumni group that what God can do. What God can do. So you got to have a dream. You see, sometimes we allow our past and our difficulties to occlude that which God is doing. And so, that's what we're going to talk about today. Got to have a dream. I want to explain just a little bit about what I do, because I have the privilege of working with Elder Wilson, the General Conference President, a man whom I have great appreciation. Don't always agree, but I have great admiration. One of the things my mother taught me when I was in Moses Lake, she didn't tell me this, I saw it in her example. I don't remember my mother ever being critical of the church. Never. I mean, we went along, well, there's a lot of stories we could tell. But the point is that my mother was positive about the church. She loved the church. She loved to talk about Jesus. Amen. The last time I talked to my mom, I left her in a coma in Portland, Oregon. And I had to go. I had an important appointment in East Central Africa, in Kenya. Do I leave my mom? The doctor said she will not come out. And we had a big meeting coming up for the deaf. And when I got there, and we had the second largest number of baptism in the history of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, simply because somebody believed that the deaf need to hear the gospel too. And I got word that Mom came out of her coma. And I said, Mom, guess what? Long distance call. I said, guess what, Mom? We had the second highest number of baptisms of deaf in the world. She knew how I'd been working on it. And the last words I remember, I don't think they were her last words, but the last words I remember was, oh, Larry, isn't God wonderful? That's what I remember. And that is what shapes my ministry. Come what may, what is said may be said, but God must be the focus. And we begin to see life differently, and must not let those around us crowd God out of the center. And it begins to shape who you are. I look back, all the way back to Moses Lake. And once I get to the message, Carolyn is over there saying, hurry up, Larry, you don't have much time. So it goes through. And you begin to see how God prepared you. And all the things that I've done. And Laurie, I must say, Laurie Redmer, wherever I saw you, there you are. You may not realize the prestigious role that she plays at Southern Adventist University. She is very highly respected. I was on that university board for, was it 5 years or something like that? And so it's interesting to see how God leads. And someone else I must recognize, and that is my dear wife, Carolyn. Because she won't tell you this story. I always have to tell her to tell the story. But when I was in New Jersey, I was president there, and I got a call. People came running to my office and said, hey, something's happened to Carolyn. You got to go. And when she was down there, she was just crying. Because we'd just learned that our niece, who had just been with us, she was moving from the East Coast to the West Coast, what we've always called home. She had been murdered. Horribly murdered. It's a gruesome thing. We went to the room and we saw stuff that was terrible. But for 16 years, when I was in Georgia Cumberland Conference, I believe is when it started, she began visiting Anthony, the man who murdered Shannon. It's a story that she has told in Sunday churches. She's told to ministerial groups or wives and so forth. It is amazing, Dick, what grace can do. This man who did such a horrible thing to someone we loved is so deeply sorry and has asked for forgiveness. He left the Muslim faith and became a Christian thanks to Carrie's ministry over 16 years, and they became like mother and son. I've been there and I've seen it. Same age as our oldest son. He's 46 today because I know that because that's how long it's been since we've been in Moses Lake. 46 years ago. You think somebody that many years would retire, wouldn't you? Yeah. So I've got far too much, and Carolyn knows that I always prepare too much. I never want anyone to go away without being filled with something. So we've got a lot to share in a short time, but I'm going to go ahead and quickly go through it. Pastor, thank you for giving us the pulpit. I think, if I remember right, his brother was our dentist when we were here. So, and I must tell one other story. I have to do this, sorry. Because I came from a home that was not the perfect Adventist home, I knew that something was missing. Judith, I want to say Wentland, but it's Hanson. I don't know if she's here. But her mother was my Sabbath school teacher. Great impression. Another person that really had a big influence on me was when my mother, somebody from the church, realized we needed some guidance and worked it out so I could go to summer camp. And Dr. and Mrs. Downs decided that they would drive us. And I said, I'm going to be with a real Adventist family. I'm going to watch to see what they do. And so they came down our long driveway to pick us up at our home out there on our farm out in May Valley. And I got into the car, and guess what they did? We got in, they closed the door, and they had prayer before we went for a long drive. I said, oh, so that's what Adventists do. And then I watched, I said, do Adventists read newspapers? We do in our home, but do they do that? And then I listened to their conversation, and I tell you this because you begin watching to see. I spent one summer on the watermelon farm, on the Fisher watermelon farm. There's a lot of stories you could tell about that. It's a wonderful experience, except you do not want to eat too many hearts out of those watermelons. It's got some bad results. But let me share with you. Because of the background and the difficult moments, running away from home for a while, a lot of stories that I could tell. I was not a ministerial candidate. So I don't stand here. What I'm going to share with you is not coming from pride, but coming from praise to what God can do in a life. And don't let the assistant to the president of the general conference, in some parts of the world that means something good. In other parts of the world it's, you do what? Say, I had a friend say, so what does that mean? You wash his car? In a very derogatory way. And we went to seminary together. Come on, folks. We are a positive people. God takes lives and puts people in different places. You'd never believe who should be there. And I don't belong there. But that's where I am. And God is doing, there's a movement taking place. Now, you probably haven't heard too much about it. But there is a movement taking across in many parts of the world today. 1.1 billion people of the world today are disabled. And what are we doing? 300 million deaf. Only 2% are Christian. We've got to do something. I just spoke in Loma Linda at a large plenary session, doctors and all sorts of people there. And I'm telling them, listen, we've got to do something. I would suggest, not because I wrote it, please, not because I wrote it, but because of the message. Look at the July review, Adventist Review, and talk about called to move mountains. That's what we've been called to do. We have been called to move mountains. Any hindrance that there is keeping people away from knowing God. That's what we've been called. That's the Isaiah message. That's the John the Baptist message. That's the three angels message. We must remove any barrier, and that includes people who are disabled. All right, I've done all my advertising. Now for the message of the day. Let's go. We don't need to be convinced that we live in a broken world. Listen to the news, talk to each other, feel your own heartbeat, know the crises that you face and the world faces. We know that the world is broken today. And living in a broken world often means that lives get fractured and people are hurt, and fear of the unknown cripples hope for the future. We become concerned. We begin to lose the very essence of who we are. We lose that sense of hope. So broken dreams in a broken world, that's what's happening. It happens to the world. It happens to you and me. And it happens to the church. And we have to learn that shattered hopes and shattered lives are why we are here in the world today, to bring hope and encouragement to those who have lost hope. You see, we've got to have a dream because we've got to share that dream with others. We've got to restore dreams, restore a positive thinking in the lives and the hearts of other people. So the depressive thoughts that come across our mind, your mind, and my mind, or our work or our hopes for a new job, what's going to happen? I've been a pastor. I'm still a pastor at heart. And I must say here, you represent the very first pastoral assignment I ever had. And in the audience are people from Hermiston, Oregon, my last pastoral assignment as a church pastor. But you know, we're concerned here. We have the financial facing a financial crisis. People are facing that. A love relationship that has gone badly. I've talked to a lot of people who are discouraged, who call me from all parts of the world, going through some very tough times with their own love relationships, or a doctor's report. That was not discouraging. That is not encouraging. The loss of a loved one. We moved from Maryland to Vancouver, Washington, about a year ago, so we could be close to my brother and Carolyn's sister, who were both dying of cancer. We were there 2 months before they both died. It was painful. That hurts. The loss of a loved one, those who go through divorce. I've heard that 80% of families with autistic children divorce. Autism is one of the 7 branches, part of one branch of 7 ministries that I care for in the Adventist World Church. They were not covered before, per se. And we put together a plan and a strategy, and we're restoring hope. And maybe it's your family. Maybe it's your family here that you're struggling with, extended or whatever. I like to read, and I found this quote. I'm a collector of quotes. We see either the dust on the window or the view beyond the window, but never the window itself. We don't see God always at work. But he's that window pane that is there, always working. We sometimes focus on that speck on the window, or we focus something far in the distance, but we never really are able to see the hand of God, but we know it's there. And that is the basis by which we build hope. So I know about disappointments because I once had a dream. I once had a dream. And that dream happened while I lived in Moses Lake. So let me tell you about my dream. I was young. I don't remember the age exactly when it happened. Maybe 8 or 9 years old. But I remember going to school in Peninsula Elementary School after going to our school. And I would hear kids talk about, older kids, I would hear them talking about their farm work. We lived on a farm, small farm, 80 acres, about 2,500 chickens, about 900 geese, 2 goats, 2 milk cows. When we got there, there were 33 cats. Once we got some dogs, we had no more cats. And I grew up on the farm, but the big thing about this farm, I grew up on 2 farms. One great big large farm in South Dakota, which was my grandfather's wheat farm. And you showed the sagebrush when he went and started his wheat land. It was all barren, and he moved up from Texas and created a farm there, 10.5 sections, almost 7,000 acres. It's a big farm, but the one I'm talking about now is one here in Moses Lake. I wanted to drive a tractor. I mean, all the guys were talking about driving a tractor. I mean, that's what I wanted to do. And we had a tractor. It was a huge tractor. I mean, it was huge. Well, I look at it now and it looks really small. An old International farm tractor. And I would ask Dad, can I drive the tractor? Can I drive the tractor? He says, you're not big enough, Larry, not yet. And I'd get out there on that tractor, I'd climb way up, climb up on that tractor, and you know what boys do when they start driving a tractor? Yes, and I found the throttle, and I could just feel the wind blowing through my, I used to have hair. And I could feel I could feel it blowing through there, and I would turn around and I could pretend, and I could see the dust swirling up behind me. I mean, I was living my dream. I knew where the gears were. I was ready to drive the tractor. Dad said, not yet, not yet. Oh. Mom would measure us. Did you have that in your home too? The little marks on the wall? Oh yeah, Mom marked it up there, and I would stand straight. Not only because I wanted to be tall, but because I wanted to drive the tractor. And we would mark, and it would be so slow. It would move up so slow. It seemed forever. One day, Dad and I were out in the field. One of the strange things about farms around here is that you don't plant rocks, but they grow. You don't plant them. You can plant everything else. They don't grow, but the rocks grow. And if you don't get the rocks out of the field, you'll really mess up the farm machinery. So we were out there, with farm all out front, pulling a little trailer behind, and Dad would get the big rocks, and I'd get the little ones. And Dad left me back there once, and he went up to the tractor, and he had this great big smile on his face. And he said, Larry, would you like to take the tractor in and gas it up? I said, no, not today. I don't quite feel like it. No way. I said, really, this is exciting. I can hardly wait. And so I got in the tractor. He unhitched the trailer. I got in the tractor. He did not get on with me. And I was there. Now, let me tell you about the tractor. Excuse me one moment. All right. This was a red International tractor. Red International tractor. It had a big black cracked steering wheel and a silver throttle. It was a huge tractor. What kind of tractor was it? What color? Red. What color was the throttle? Silver. What color was the steering wheel? Did I mention that it was cracked? Thank you. It was what? It was. Now, yes, I can tell you, you know. So now, as I was, don't have time for this, Larry. There we go. One of the things that I had to do is, well, I'm not going to give you more quizzes because we're running out of time. Let me tell you this. What I had to do, I climbed up there, and it was just like I practiced. I put it in gear, I pulled the silver throttle down, and that tractor lurched off, and I felt the wind, and sure enough, there was dust behind, because I knew how to pull the throttle down, which meant I was going fast. But I need to tell you about this gas tank. This isn't the actual tank, but it was built like that. It was a silver tank, high up in the air, held up by 4 rusty iron legs with a long black hose that hung out of it. All you had to do is drive up beside it and put the hose in, squeeze, and you filled your tank. Simple, simple. Behind that, though, there was a white corral fence. And behind that and off to the side was a deep gravel pit. Now, Carolyn doesn't believe my story, but I'm saying it was 30 feet deep. Okay, 30 feet deep. So the idea is now I had to drive, come around, curve, and then line up and come beside that silver tank. I'm living my dream. I wanted to be like all the big boys. Wait till I get to school. I'm going to tell them what I did. And I came up around. Now, there's so much you have to do so quickly. I mean, in order for me to reach the clutch, I had to grab hold of the black cracked steering wheel, slide off my seat, reach for the clutch, and try to steer with my chin. Not a good picture. I came up there, the next thing I heard was the crash of a red International tractor against 2 of those rusty iron legs. I looked up and the silver tank was leaning over me. The black hose was swinging. The next thing I heard was the crunching sound of the tractor plowing through the white corral fence. And by then, I missed that 100-foot, wasn't it 100-foot deep gravel pit? I missed that. And I stopped. I was able to stop. And I stayed there shaking. I don't know how long it is. When I got to seminary, we studied what the word eternity meant. That was pretty good. That was pretty good. Probably only a week, though. And so I'm standing there. I'm sitting there waiting for Dad to come. Dad came. Dad was not angry. But on that day, I lost my dream. You see, I crashed a tractor. I crashed my dream when I crashed that tractor because that is what I wanted to do. That's what I wanted to become. And that tractor crashed. And now, what do? I lost my dream, so I stopped dreaming. Let me tell you, with reflection and study over the years, I've discovered that pride will eventually crash your tractor. It will crash your hopes. It will crash your dream because pride is nothing more than self-absorption and always built on comparison. You take away comparison, you take away pride. Pride is a singular focus on ourselves and on our circumstances. It almost always comes by making comparisons. Another word is self-absorption and comes in 2 forms. One is the superior form, I'm better than you. The other form is, I'm not as good as you. Either way, it's pride. Either way, you're absorbed with yourself and you begin to have problems. Pride will eventually crash. You see, identity was tied up with what I thought I wanted to do or become. So when I couldn't do something, my dreams crashed. I stopped dreaming. My value of myself was built on what I can do, not on who I was. And this is the theme of the seminars I do many places, and that is, we have an inherent dignity because we are created in the image of God. And yet we substitute that inherent dignity for values based on what we can do or earn or the recognition we get. My focus now was on my mistakes and on my past. I lost a vision for the future because of my past. What could have been, what I wanted it to be like. And so my vision like that was bound to eventually lead to confusion and despair, depression, and disappointment. But you see, I was being conditioned. You're being conditioned. I was being shaped by my society, by my culture, by my own expectations. I believed that my value was found in my body. I wasn't tall enough. So we talk about body size, body shape. How many times do you look in the mirror and say, and allow your value to be shaped by your shape? It's a danger. Or in my abilities, what I'm able to do or not able to do. In what others thought of me. Popularity or honors or lack of it. I discovered that the more recognition I got, the farther I became distanced from my own father. My mother explained to me one day, your dad is jealous of you. I've had a number of different things that most parents would be proud of. But something happened. Let me finish that story because when Dad was dying, Dad asked me to read a book that I had given to him of poems. I cried. I could hardly read it because the man who had hurt me so much was now asking me to pray for him. And that was healing for me. Little did I know that that is exactly what I needed to do, the kind of ministry that God had called me to do. And what I did or did not do in the past, see, those are things. The attitude grew and grew. I compared myself with what my peers were doing, by what the media was telling me, by my own limited understanding of what I thought was important for the moment. I was conditioned, and I grew in that conditioning. I was set up for losing hope and confidence and not able to dream about new possibilities and a new future. And the same thing happens with local churches. I took training. I was trained by some profound church consultants. They were not Seventh-day Adventists, but they invited me to join with them. I was picked out of the class, which was a real honor. Out of the non-Adventist group, they invited an Adventist to join with them and create a new business in Grand Rapids, Michigan, while I was still in the Oregon Conference. Had permission to do that. I later quit. But one of the things I learned is that churches do this. Churches set themselves up to fail because we set our hopes and aspirations on the wrong thing. And so Paul tells us, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Don't let the world crowd you into its mold. So the influence of that broken dream, oh boy, I'll just say this. It had a devastating effect on my ministry. And it really did an unfortunate turn. Because I turned down, Anita, I wanted to tell the story. Where's Anita? Somewhere I saw you. There you are. As she was telling me about her story to India, and I was going to tell the story about India, but I better not. But I'll just say, I will say this much. I had refused to go to India to do this evangelistic series, and ended up going. But I didn't want to go because the red tractor experience kept coming to my mind. Different points, Hermiston and other places came to my mind, and I said, I'm not going to crash another tractor. Little points, not the whole thing, but little points here and there. And I said, I'm not going to crash the tractor, but I went. Through a series of things that caused me to go. And what happened was, they weren't ready when we got there. Finally, they started coming. I was told there would be 1,000 people would come. First day, there was nobody there because they weren't ready. So we didn't even have the meeting. Long story short, by the time we finished, the local people counted, there were between 8,000 and 10,000 people who were sitting there. And what surprised me was when I pulled the curtain back from the speakers, and I looked back to hear that, because I could hear the people coming. Guess what they were doing? They were riding on trailers, pulled by red tractors. I couldn't help. It wasn't me that was driving. The reason the people were coming wasn't me. God was doing it. It was very important. Mistakes and disappointments will happen, but what we do with them makes all the difference in the world. We aren't the only ones who have broken dreams, by the way, because God himself also had a dream that was broken. The good news is that he has not lost his dream, and you and I are his dream. His dream was broken when the world fell away. In the beginning, God had a plan. God had a purpose. God created man in his own image, and he gave them everything that they could that was good and plentiful, wonderful food. God blessed them. But God's dream was interrupted by selfishness when Eve began to think outside of God. When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for what? For food and pleasing to the eye and for gaining wisdom, she took and ate it. Let me tell you, this is the quick version of this. In a perfect world, Adam and Eve were placed. They found plenty of everything. There was beauty everywhere. But notice what happened. Eve redefined what was good. God had shown them what food was good, and she took what Satan offered and said, oh, this is good for food. God had already defined. Don't we do that today? Don't we redefine what is good? Then we begin to find that Eve redefined what was pleasing. We find all sorts of pleasures today that are substitutes for what God has. Eve redefined the source of wisdom. She listened to Satan rather than to God. And one of the challenges today is that we are redefining the source of wisdom. We listen to all sorts of voices other than God's. Did God stop dreaming? No. Did what others do stop him from dreaming? Did the lies by the serpent stop him? Did future difficulties stop him? Have generations of rebellion stopped his dreaming? No. God still believes in us. In their darkest moments, spoken of as nakedness and shame, God did not forsake them. During the time of agony, when they realized what they had done to God's dream, he clothed them with a promise that they could not fully understand at the time. What he did was to clothe them with an unbelievable promise. The Lord made garments of skin for Adam and Eve and clothed them. Garments of slain animals began to be their covering. And then we find in Isaiah, I delight greatly in the Lord. My soul rejoices in my God, for he has clothed me with garments of salvation and arrayed me in the robe of righteousness. Those skins that covered Adam and Eve were a promise of what God would cover them with his righteousness. We found from sin that was cursed in the ground because of you. It will produce thorns and thistles, and yet we begin to find that Jesus hanging on the cross, they stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him and then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. Jesus wore as his crown our curse that we might be saved. Those thorns that came with sin, Jesus symbolized as his crown of glory. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. For it is when written, cursed is everyone who is hung on a pole. And I remind you that it was Jesus who created the tree and now crucified on that tree, bearing our curse. The Apostle Paul made many mistakes, including the persecution of God's own people before his conversion. But he grew beyond the mistakes that he had made and disappointments of the past, which he suffered. And then he says this, I focus on this one thing, forgetting the past and looking forward to what lies ahead. I press on to reach the end of the race and receive the heavenly prize which God through Christ Jesus is calling us. Forgetting the past and looking forward. We must do that because I'm not happy with the bad language I had and a multitude of other things. I look forward, and I'm able to do that because Jesus bore the curse for me. Amen. And I can go from there. And this is a little proverb that I've come up with out of my own experience. Don't try to write the conclusion when God is still adding chapters. Amen. God is still working for you. I don't know whether to tell this story or not. I have to. Okay. I'll ask for forgiveness later. Okay. I'm sitting in Chicago on a flight to Canada. This was when I was in Oregon Conference, and we were setting up a whole brand new strategy that I think God impressed me with to reach the Native American Indians, and because we weren't doing much at that point. But that's another story. I'm sitting there in the airport, and I'm saying, God, I'm awfully tired, but I'm willing to be used if I can be used. But if not, I would sure like to sleep. I'm awfully tired. And so get on the plane, and they usher me into my seat. I sit down. I was in an aisle seat, which I like, and I'm sitting there, and a lady sitting next to me. And pretty soon the stewardess comes to me and says, sir, excuse me, this man up here would like to sit by this lady. It's his wife. Would you mind? You could move back here to have this row by yourself. And I looked over at the lady and I said, no, I'd like to sit with her myself. No, I didn't say that. I said, sure. So I moved in the back, and I sat in the back of the plane. Nobody back there. Really good. And seat next to me, I took the window seat, and the aisle seat here was open. And they're about ready to close the door, just ready to close the door, when somebody walked in. Oh, brother. Well, there's some empty seats up there. He was looking at his ticket, and he's walking down. And I could see him down a distance. He had long hair. The more I could see, it was matted, looked dirty. As I remember, his clothes were buttoned unevenly, and some of his shirt tail was out. What really bothered me was he wasn't walking in a straight line. I mean, you can't really get too far. I mean, the aisles aren't, but he was wobbling back and forth. And I said, oh, no. And he kept coming back, and he skipped some seats, came back, and he stood right beside my empty seat. And he sat down. And, oh, the smell was terrible. Now, you need to know that when I was in college, I worked for ambulance. And I went to a number of car accidents and pulled people out of there who had been drinking, and the smell of blood and alcohol is terrible. And I get blood. I mean, it was terrible. And I remember Friday nights going by Kelly's Tavern, not too far from Frontier Junior High, on Friday nights when Mom would load up the kids, and we would go look for Dad in one of those taverns. He didn't always drink, but during a certain period of time, he did. It's a traumatic time. And this guy reminded me of all those things. I did not like him from the beginning. And he's sitting next to me. So before the plane even got off the ground, this guy fell asleep. Fortunately for me, he leaned away, and he was leaning in the aisle, and he started drooling. Now, we have a word. I don't know if you use this, but for me, it's clear. It's yuck. Does not need translation. And the stewardess, as they would walk by, they'd do the same thing. This guy said, oh, no. And I looked at him, and then I remembered. I remembered praying, God, if you can use me, use me. I argued with God. I said, that's true. I did say that. I did. But there's no way I can talk to this guy. But I will honor your will. Amen. This is truth. As I said my silent amen, this guy sat straight up, looked at me this far from my nose, and said, hi. Oh, it was bad. It was bad. As I listened to him tell his story, I began listening to his story. I was amazed. I said, tell me, where are you going? Well, that was rather obvious. I mean, the plane only goes one place. He's on his way to Calgary. And I said, where, you're going to Calgary? Yes. Why are you going there? Because my family won't accept me. I could have said, well, I understand that, but I didn't. And I said, so why are you going to Calgary? What if your family's rejecting you, who's up there? He says, my aunt. But why would she accept you? He says, I don't know, except, well, she's a Christian. And I said, oh, do you know who Jesus is? No. Do you know what a Christian believes? No. Can I tell you? Do you have a minute? Can I tell you? 35,000 feet in the air, I'm telling this drunk man in a private quarters at the back of a plane about Jesus. 4 points. I always have these 4 points. You can use them all sorts of different ways, but I always share these when passing absolute strangers. 1, God has a plan for every person. Isn't that what creation starts with? And the Bible starts with Genesis 1, not Genesis 3. If the Bible started with Genesis 3, we would all be under judgment. But we start with Genesis 1, where God has hope and purpose. Right? So let's get on with the Adventist message. Let's start where the Bible starts. In the beginning, God, not in the beginning, sin. God has a plan. So God has a plan. I said, number 2, we've all fallen away. And we've lost the purpose and the hope that God has given to all of us. Number 3, the good news is God found a way to get us back on the path. That's called Jesus. And number 4, God says, just when you get back on the path, I'm not going to abandon you. I'm going to walk with you. I will be your forever friend. Isn't that what you want? Yes, he said. Yes. I said, would you like to pray with me? Yes. I said, I pray first, then you repeat after me. Okay, 35,000 feet in the air, a prejudiced minister and a repentant sinner are praying together. We get through praying. He says, I wasn't supposed to be on this flight. I said, really? I said, well, I'm not supposed to be in this seat. He said, then God must have done this. This drunk is telling me. Then after that, he says, I was ready. If my aunt did not accept me, I was going to end my life. And I said to myself, what if my prejudice had kept me away from him? What if? It was a wonderful experience. He got off the plane, went one way through customs, and I went through a different way. The crowd was big, but I'm tall enough, and I saw him standing on his tiptoes. I could not understand a word he said. I couldn't hear it, but I could understand. Thank you. Thank you. You see, we've got to have a dream. We've got to have a dream that is not clouded by our past mistakes, and we must not cloud people's future by our own prejudices. Because we're all equal at the foot of the cross, and Jesus is calling us all. Come to me, he says, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Yes, we can dream again. But why? Fear not, for I've redeemed you. I've summoned you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One. You are precious and honored in my sight. I love you. You've got to have a dream. Father in heaven, thank you for your grace, for the mercy, for your understanding, and for your willingness to walk with us. Lord, thank you for giving us a dream again. Help us never to dream about crashed tractors, but about you driving our tractors. And may we always cooperate with you, and may your Holy Spirit come upon this congregation and fill us with your compassion and love and vision for the future. In Jesus' name, amen.